just out of curiosity, how many of you would call yourselves a fire manager? And how many of you would call yourself a wildlife biologist? Hey, they're hanging out over there all covied up. And how many of you would call yourselves a forester? Yeah, so that's good. We could do better, but we got a little bit of everything. And it's really good, these meetings if we can get people of different disciplines and backgrounds together, it really helps us do a better job at land management and find solutions to our problems. People coming from different geographies, like Bill said, are dealing with different issues. Maybe the problem you have, they solved it 20 years ago. And so it's good to mingle and talk it up. So I hope you do that while you're here. I was raised a forester, and how I was really brought into fire was by wildlife people, because they managed open lands in Missouri. There's no timber on them. What do we do with them? Give them to the wildlife people. And so they used fire to keep those lands open, and fire was satanic to foresters. When I started hanging out with wildlife people and natural history people, I was damned by some of the foresters as being corrupted on drugs and misguided at best. But as it turns out, those natural community ecologists and wildlife people were right, and the foresters are joining in the Great Awakening. And so we're on the low end of the learning curve on how to live with fire and use fire to do good things and things we want. And there's nothing wrong with people wanting good things. The Native Americans wanted it, and they managed accordingly. And there's nothing wrong with us wanting stuff and managing accordingly. And it takes active management to get the things done that need to be done. So how do I advance the slides here? I'm going to take you on a journey of my professional life, and it starts in college, the beginning of the Great Transformation, where this Ozark hillbilly was turned into a city slicker. And part of that transformation is I went to forestry school in Missouri, and the only fire class we had was how to put fires out and sing Smokey the Bear song. I learned my ecology from Spur and Barnes, and we have a long history of ecological understanding of succession in this country over the last 100 years, and it's changed quite a bit. So no matter what science tells you today, it's probably going to be wrong, or at best really simplistic to what's really going on out there. But the good thing is we're able to learn and adapt and modify, hopefully admit when we're wrong. And but this is the foundations for what I was taught in school, that succession is an orderly progression of increasing complexity in vegetation development that ends in a stable and mature climax forest. And whether it was outrightly stated or not, we took that to mean that was the ultimate goal of our work. And fire is one of the disturbances that disrupts this orderly progression. And besides, we all know fire is bad. So put it out. Get the cows and the fire out of the woods. That's what I was taught when I came out of school. And I worked most of my career, I worked around, but most of it with the U.S. Forest Service, which is the major fire suppression agency in this country. And they and many of the state conservation, DNRs, the origins of those agencies were in large part to get the wildfires under control. And there were a lot of wildfires from the early settlers, the Europeans. But as more and more came in and more settlements sprang up and more developments occurred on private lands, it became a problem. And so it's like, we need to get this wildfire under control. And there was a big debate going on in the country at the beginning of the 19th, or what century am I in anyways, the 20th century. And You know, it was between the people who advocated light burning, it might be called Indian burning, in a derogatory way by the opponents. It was called Paiute forestry or Paiute burning. And the fire suppression people won that debate at that time. And then we had a big blow up in 1910 out in the northern Rockies. And after Gifford Pinchot, the next 4 chiefs of the Forest Service actually fought fire on that big blow up. And that really influenced how they viewed fire in the forest. It was bad, it was the enemy, it was destructive. So they said things like, we can defeat fire and remove it from the landscape. We just need to apply enough science, technology, and manpower. And then in 1935, they decreed that all fires will be put out by 10 o'clock the next morning after they're spotted. And then in 1944, Smokey Bear comes along, and he was very effective in that message. So this is the culture, the attitude of the agency when I was hired into it in 1979. I worked a couple of summers in Wyoming as a student, and but my first job was in '79 on the Tongass National Forest. And then in '82, I went to the Nez Perce National Forest in Idaho. Well, we didn't fight a lot of fire in Alaska because it rains 160 inches a year, you know, so good luck starting a fire. But in Idaho, in northern Rockies, we certainly had fire. And the kind of fire we used in management was prescribed burning, and it was just to clean up the hazardous slash after logging on 20 or 40 acre clear cuts. Fire other than that was to be put out, and we did our best to try to do that. So I moved along from there, came back to grad school to get my PhD in 1987. And a couple of things were really influences on me then. I studied under the great Paul Johnson, the oak guru, who wrote that book you see there, culmination of his life. And I learned a lot from him about oak forest. And then I became office mates and schoolmates with my good friend Rich Guyette. And he transformed my life. He was a major driver in how I viewed things and what I thought was important and what I decided to work on. So we met and became good friends. After the PhD, I went up to Ontario in '91 and '96, and they hired me there to save their northern red oak. They were running into the same problem everyone else does. It's being taken over by fire-sensitive, shade-tolerant maples and beech and whatnot. So that was my first science job. And I immediately went out and I created shelter woods and started burning underneath them. And that was in the early 90s. At the same time, another grad student, Pat Brose, working with Dave Van Leer, sorry, Tom Waldrop, but Dave Van Leer, started doing the similar things in Virginia. Before the use of fire in these oak forests, like these studies of ours, where we saw fire being used was in the coastal piney woods. And just some examples, in 1946, on the Santee Experimental Forest, on the Francis Marion National Forest, Tom Lowtie and I'm sure others developed a long-term study that went on for over 40 years before Hurricane Hugo blew it out. And they were looking at all kinds of seasonal and fire frequency combinations. Not too far from here, I'm not sure which direction, is the Austin Experimental Forest near Nacogdoches. And there was a study there set up by Ferguson in the 50s to look at long-term effects of fire frequency and season of fire and fire behavior, head fire, backfire effects on. They were really trying to kill hardwoods in the piney understory. In Arkansas, on the coastal plain, a guy named Grano in the mid-1950s working in coastal piney woods and fire, all trying to control hardwoods in these cases. In the 70s and 80s, you had the oak gurus, Dave Loftus, Paul Johnson, Ivan Sander. They intellectually understood that oaks had a lot of fire adaptations, but they just couldn't like get over the hurdle of thinking about using fire. But you know, eventually they had to succumb to the questions of what about fire that were coming from management and other places. And so they would include a fire as a treatment in their studies. And they would go, see, it didn't work. You know, they're trying to undo 50 years, 70 years of fire suppression with one fire, and the results were unimpressive after one fire, so they kind of dropped it. And I don't think they really wanted to see fire in the woods anyways. Foresters in this country come from a history of Germanic and French training in forestry, where we control everything, and fire's a little bit messy sometimes. You know, so it's easier to control things with a chainsaw and herbicide and things like that. So, you know, it really, I think, became a barrier for foresters to accept fire at the time. Then, at the turn of the 21st century, people like Todd Hutchinson, Tom Waldrop, Callie Schweitzer, Andy Vanderjagt, me, Stambaugh, started developing more and more fire and thinning types of studies across the U.S., from the southern Appalachians to southeastern Kansas and in between. And those studies are still ongoing, and hopefully we can keep them going, and it's the next generation of long-term studies in hardwoods or oak pine mixtures. There's a lot of questions about the sequencing of treatments, the timing of treatments, the seasonality of fire that people ask about and will be the fodder for future research. But we're off and running now in terms of research. I just want to say this about you all, that you are pioneers in this arena. And there's a lot of things you can do more quickly than research can do. And so, you know, you're really exploring treatment combinations, testing different practices, and seeing if they work or not. Hopefully you're doing it in a way where there's a little bit of monitoring so you can learn as you go along. But do not diminish the power that you all have together to learn how to use fire in land management. So I'm going to go back to my friend Rich Guyette. In that picture, it's at the end of his career. He's at Association of Fire Ecology meeting where he's receiving the Herbert L. Stoddard Award for Lifetime Achievement in Fire Ecology, Fire History, Fire Management. So that was quite an honor for him and for us to be there to cheer him on. As far as I know, one of his first fire histories was published in 1982 on using eastern red cedar, and it was kind of a concept, proof of concept, that tree rings can be used to date fire scars. Since then, the Missouri Tree Ring Lab, or they've changed their name now, they're like the Center for Tree Ring Excellence in the Galactic Universe or something like that. They just keep plugging away doing fire history sites anywhere they can drag their chainsaws. And they've done probably 160 sites since Guyette first started that work. And they've been really stalwart, you know, contributors to our understanding of fire history. Joe Marshall found the oldest recorded fire scar in Pennsylvania. The scar occurred in the year 1402. It was a red pine. So there's a lot of honors that go along with the staff in that tree ring lab that are well-deserved and hard work for. What can we learn from fire history? I became, as a forester, interested in it because I'm dealing in fire-dependent systems. So one good thing is learn your history. What can I learn from the history of these systems that can help me in my modern-day management? Well, you can learn things about fire frequency, seasonality, severity to some extent. You can see the variation in time and space as fire works across the landscape. You can understand better fire's relationships to changing populations and culture, to climate, to its influence on tree regeneration and dynamics, tree growth, and climate relationships and fire can be explored. We can better understand fire regime and how that's influenced by topography. And we can also understand, because trees are living organisms, as are turtles and fish and other critters that have annual rings in their scales or otoliths or other body parts. And they're recording and the response to the environment, to changes in climate, just like trees do. So you can relate tree rings to a lot of other biota of the ecosystem. Oh, I'm going to go back here to this one here. I was honored to be working with Guyette in the 1990s up in Canada. He came up to help me understand the fire history in these oak northern hardwood stands. We published a paper in 2000 that summarized a lot of that work. That paper was censored for a year by a reviewer who didn't believe that the northern hardwoods ever had fire. So I'm stubborn and competitive, and I fought the editor for a year, and they published our damn paper. So what I say to you is there will be naysayers out there in academia, in Forest Service research, in management. They're everywhere, and some of them are loud and forceful and powerful people. But do not be swayed or defeated by them. Rise up against the myth makers and the people who protect those myths and take them down. One thing Guyette brought to the study of fire history is his first degree was in anthropology, and he always connected humans and what humans were doing at the time to the fire history he was seeing in the tree ring record. And humans are the greatest fire igniters on the face of the earth. We overwhelm the influence of climate and topography and vegetation in the things that we do, including starting fires. And so Rich, over the course of his life, has developed a very nice story about the human relationship with fire and the effects it's had on our landscapes. There's a North American Tree Ring Fire History Database. This is a map of the current sites. There's over 2,500 sites in this database. 160 of them in eastern North America were developed by the Missouri Tree Ring Lab. A lot of that work was the foundation for this PC2FM model that Bill showed you a picture of, estimating fire frequency at a continental scale at a time that represents the end of the Native American period and the beginning of European influence. And it's based on climate variables like precipitation and temperature. And because it is, we can use it to look at the future of fire probability with changing climates. And this is from a paper by Gowlett, others, and Stanball is a co-author on this, and they used PC2FM to do this analysis. So that's kind of a summary of fire history. But one thing that I was able to be a part of was in my work with Bryce Hanbury, who's now a Forest Service scientist at the Rocky Mountain Research Station. She worked as a postdoc in Missouri for 8 or 10 years, and she's a wizard when it comes to landscape modeling and analysis. And so we spent a lot of time looking at the General Land Office vegetation survey data and estimating a species presence based on a whole host of environmental variables and site variables. And also we made estimates of tree density, percent stocking, basal area, trees per acre, all that kind of metrics of stand density. At a period of time in Missouri, that was probably from the early 1800s to 1860 or so. So it's a snapshot in time. We know how dynamic things are, but it's a snapshot in time. And at that time, what we found in this host of papers that reports all this work for Missouri, and she's done this work in other states too. And here's just some examples. The General Land Office survey estimates of shortleaf pine presence on a site. You can see how that changed with comparisons to forest inventory, modern data of shortleaf pine, a great contraction of pine. There's maybe 10% of it left compared to what it used to be. And then you see even for black oak in the Missouri Ozarks, where you think it's like the oak epicenter of oak. A monkey could grow oak in Missouri, you would say. But even there, we're losing our major oak species compared to historic conditions. And then when you take, this is the Missouri Ozarks, when you take a look at the density of trees, then versus now, the black is there's 3 times more trees now than there used to be. And that's in southwestern Missouri, where it was drier and there's more glades and savannas and woodlands, and so now it's dense forest, so 3 times more trees than there used to be. And you can see how that varied across the landscape. It's not the same story everywhere, but in general, there's more trees now than there ever used to be. And we were able to get quantitative, metrics that foresters love, and it helps us understand and relate to what's going on out there, and then to set management targets in our prescriptions to help manage density to gain other ecological desired future conditions. There's, of course, being a forester, fire is bad, right? Especially in hardwoods, because in hardwoods, the value is in the quality of the wood, not the volume. And fire can cause injuries to tree, and then fungi can get in there and rot the wood and degrade the value of that tree. So that's the fear. And so when you're telling hardwood foresters to put fire in the woods, they go, whoa, 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 wait a minute, So Joe Marshall in 2014, that's the published paper, did his master's degree looking at fire effects on tree value in red oak species in Missouri. And then since that time, there's been a number of studies by Stannis and Mann working under Mike Saunders at Purdue. And that work goes on, trying to quantify the effects of frequent fire on timber value and volume in high-value eastern hardwoods. So we're providing information to answer the manager's questions and concerns about fire effects. And what we're finding in general is it's not that bad. Our prescribed fires today are not wildfires, and they're not the same kind of fires that were in the 1920s burning through a whole landscape of log and slash. Or they're not the fires that were set by settlers who were managing for range, for grasses and range management, who didn't care if the fire hurt the trees. They didn't want the trees out there. And so our fires today are really different, and we need to understand that and be able to explain that to people. I talked about monitoring earlier. We need to do a better job in doing that, because that's how collectively we all are going to learn together and learn more quicker together, is by monitoring what you're doing operationally out in the field. And that's really going to supplement what's coming out of science in terms of advancing our knowledge and understanding, and to support adaptive management. Getting the word out to people is really important, and Todd gave you a history of this conference, and the development of a national network of fire consortia by the Joint Fire Science Program. And here's the original governing board of the Oak Woodlands. And I think there's a lot more gray-haired people there now than what you see in this picture. But those consortia, all of them, have done a wonderful job in getting people together in smaller groups, at workshops, on field tours, in webinars, in larger events like this, to get the information out there, to bring scientists and managers together, to have those fruitful conversations and build those friendships that are needed for the two to work together, pulling in the same direction. We get involved. We have university professors out here. They're grooming the next generation. I don't want, when I look back, I have to be careful not to damn my professors back then for like not telling me all the things I know today. They really were the best of people and were doing the best they could at the time. And I know that's going on today too. And I actually hope that 30 years from now, they're damning me, because that means they learned something. And I'm not afraid to say I was wrong. But we have fire classes in undergraduate programs now that teach more than just how to put fires out. And we have student prescribed fire groups that many of you professors are leading and other people are contributing to. And we're getting people trained and comfortable with using fire in forest and grassland management. Another big role we play, management and science, is when we get challenged, even at the highest levels. So here was a challenge from forest industry in Missouri against burning and woodland restoration in Missouri. And they brought down upon us US senators and congressmen and women, and we met out in the woods, and the chief of the Forest Service was there, and the Mark Twain National Forest was under the microscope. And because they do good management there, because they have strong relationships with research, and they have a good, strong relationships with partners, external partners, we all rallied there and we blew the opponents away. But the threat was a national moratorium on prescribed burning with the Forest Service. I mean, so there were high stakes here. But we were able to come together and help each other and ward off these attacks. We trained a lot of graduate students. I was on Mike Stambaugh's master's and PhD committee, and these are the scientists for the future. So we're really active in doing that. When I say we, I mean all of academia and federal and state scientists, and participating in that. And we're in most cases working with you all managers, where our research sites are located on your lands. So we really appreciate you generating the questions that drive the research, and then you being willing to dedicate some of your land and all the other things you do for us to get the harvesting done, the burning done, the contracting done, to get the study treatments in place, and then protect that site as we monitor it over the years. So it's really a slick partnership, and I know it's strong in places, and I just hope it grows beyond there. I would just recommend to you all that you take opportunities in your agencies or organizations to move around a little bit, do details, take a chance, even doing something you think, I would never do that. So, for example, I did a 5-month detail in the national office with the Forest Service, and as a national program lead of fire. And I did that for 5 months, which is enough time to learn the job a little bit, learn the people, see how the Washington office works. It doesn't, help me not be critical of them, but I'm a lot more understanding. And what really helps is making contacts there. So I'm better able to communicate with them and to understand them and to operate in their world, because they have the money, they control the policy that I'm complaining about. So now I'm able to somewhat influence that, or at least let them understand what the consequences are of what they're thinking about, which they honestly and innocently often don't know. And so try that. I was a project leader for 13 years with the research office in Columbia, Missouri, and now I'm assistant director of research for Northern Research Station. So I'm moving around. All these jobs are different, but it's really helped me understand better the organization I'm working in and the people. I'm better connected with the people, and I'm more effective, I think, in how I do my job, because I have these experiences and understandings and connections. So I encourage you to do that. If you're a forester, detail into a wildlife department, or vice versa. Diversity is the spice of life. Broaden, get out of your box. And because even within your agency, people think differently. Go figure it out. What are they all about? The transformation continues to this day. I think it might be near perfection. Here I am, you know, with the butterfly on my hard hat. Pollinators love me. They know who to love. I've hugged a tree from the inside out. I'm touring with the lead singer in the group called Strand of Oaks. Not really. But what it makes me think of is the influence of culture on getting the word out. Smokey the Bear, come on. Strand of Oaks, you know. Dan Day, backup singer. And we probably could do a whole lot more there using popular media and culture to get the word out and reach people who aren't like us. And I just put that sign, me standing next to that Forest Service sign, because by and large I've worked with the Forest Service and I've really had a rewarding career with them, and it's still going. So you aren't getting rid of me. Some final thoughts. Find passion in your work and pursue it. Who wants to work at a job that's a living hell? You know, I had people early in my career say, I only have 27 more years till I retire. You know, and I'm like, and they hate their jobs. I'm like, get out, do something different. Work with a diversity of good people. Not all people are good. You can waste your time on bad people. They can suck your life energy out of you. Learn early how to detect good and bad people. Stay away from the bad. Hang out with the good, the thinkers, the doers. It brings value added to your work. It makes you more productive. It magnifies the influence and the application of your work when you work with others. Share what you know respectfully and humbly. Don't be arrogant. Don't be condescending. Don't be patriarchal or lecturing or anything like that. Better yet, listen to and consider what others are saying. Even your opponents. They will refine you like fire and hone you like steel on steel. Never lose your love of learning. Express yourself creatively in your work. Join a rock and roll band. Embrace change. It's not bad. It might be scary, but it's not bad. Do not fear being wrong, and be free to admit it when you are. Be a servant leader. Help others to solve their problems. Enjoy your work. Find humor even in the worst of times, and laugh a lot. Be rooted in your past and be flexible to grow into the future. Here's Guyette and I standing in front of Aldo Leopold's shack. Aldo Leopold started out in the 1920s as an opponent to the light burners. And over the course of his life, and through good friendships with people like Herbert L. Stoddard, who taught him a lot about the role of fire in ecosystem management, Aldo changed his tune. And unfortunately, he died at the age of 61 fighting a fire on his neighbor's land. He died right there at that spot where you see that stump. The Aldo Leopold Foundation was clearing that site and making a little memorial garden for him. And of course, when you hang out with Rich Guyette and there's a stump or an old tree around, you always got to look at it. So Guyette says, that tree was probably here when Leopold died. I wonder if it has a fire scar on it. Well, we didn't cut the tree, the Leopold Foundation did, but since they cut it, here is Rich Guyette with the great-grandson of Aldo Leopold, Jed Monet, looking for a fire scar. I don't think they found one. So Aldo must have stopped the fire before it got to that tree. Be careful when you go to town with a group of foresters. You'll probably end up in jail. Enjoy the ride. This is Rich Guyette enjoying a Maine lobster on his last fire history collection trip that I had the honor to go with him on. And be forever young. Never lose that in your heart, even though your body is falling apart. And I thank you.